The evening in Pine Ridge was quiet, the kind of calm that made everything feel still and peaceful. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. Most people were settling into their routines, cooking dinner, watching TV, or reading a book. But then, something unusual happened. A bright light shot across the sky, brighter than any star or airplane. It moved fast, leaving a glowing trail behind it before disappearing into the dense forest on the outskirts of town. At first, no one paid much attention. People thought it was just a meteor or maybe a plane crashing. But soon, strange sounds started coming from the woods. Low hums, like machinery, mixed with rustling leaves and snapping branches. The noises grew louder, and by midnight, nearly everyone in Pine Ridge knew something wasn't right. Phones buzzed with messages and calls as neighbors shared what they'd seen or heard. Some were scared, others were curious. Daniel Carter sat in his garage, tinkering with an old car engine. He wasn't the type to get excited easily, but when he heard about the light and the noises, his curiosity got the better of him. Daniel loved solving problems and figuring things out. To him, this felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Grabbing a flashlight and a toolbox, he decided to check it out. Grace Miller, a schoolteacher who lived 2 streets away, also couldn't ignore the commotion. She had always been fascinated by science fiction stories and often dreamed of meeting aliens. When she saw the glow from her window, she grabbed a jacket and headed toward the forest too. Grace wasn't reckless. She brought her phone, a notebook, and a pen, just in case she needed to document anything. As fate would have it, Daniel and Grace crossed paths near the edge of the woods. They didn't know each other well, though they'd exchanged polite smiles at the grocery store a few times. "You heading out there?" Daniel asked, shining his flashlight toward the trees. Grace nodded. "I want to see what's going on," she admitted. "Care if I tag along?" The two ventured deeper into the forest, their footsteps crunching against fallen leaves. The air smelled earthy, and the moonlight filtered through the thick canopy above them. After walking for 10 minutes, they came across a clearing and stopped dead in their tracks. In the center stood a massive object, unlike anything they'd ever seen. It was round and metallic, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. The surface looked smooth, almost liquid-like, and it gave off a soft hum. Before they could process what they were seeing, movement caught their eyes. A figure emerged from the shadows near the craft. It was tall and slender, with skin that seemed to glow faintly. Its large, oval-shaped eyes locked onto Daniel and Grace, making them freeze. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, a voice, not spoken aloud, but resonating inside their heads, spoke. "Do not fear. We are not here for you." Daniel swallowed hard, clutching his flashlight tightly. Grace took a step forward, her heart racing, but her mind calm. "Who? What are you?" she asked hesitantly. The creature tilted its head slightly, studying her. "We are explorers," it replied. "Our mission does not involve your kind." Despite the initial shock, Daniel and Grace realized the being didn't seem hostile. If anything, it looked confused, perhaps even concerned. As they stood there, trying to make sense of the situation, they noticed small sparks flying from the ship. Whatever these visitors were doing, something had gone wrong. And somehow, Daniel and Grace felt compelled to help. Daniel and Grace stayed in the clearing, their hearts pounding but their minds racing with questions. The alien, taller than either of them, with shimmering skin that seemed to shift colors under the moonlight, stood silently for a moment. Its large eyes scanned the area, as if assessing whether it could trust these two strangers. Finally, it spoke again, its voice calm and clear inside their heads. "We mean no harm," it said. "Our ship is damaged. We need assistance." Grace took a cautious step closer, her curiosity outweighing her fear. "What's your name?" she asked softly, trying to sound friendly. The creature paused, then replied, "You may call me Zale." It tilted its head slightly, studying her. Your language is complex. This form of communication will suffice. Daniel, still gripping his flashlight, glanced at the ship. Small sparks continued to fly from one section, accompanied by a faint buzzing noise. He pointed toward it. Is that why you're here? Because something went wrong with your ship. Zale nodded slowly. Yes, a malfunction occurred during entry. We did not anticipate this complication. Its tone was calm, almost apologetic. Our mission is not to interact with your species. However, circumstances have changed. Grace felt a mix of awe and nervousness. She had read countless books about aliens, but none of them prepared her for actually meeting one. What asterisk is asterisk your mission? She asked carefully. Zale hesitated before answering. We seek an object buried beneath your planet's surface. It belongs to an ancient civilization, a relic of great importance. The alien's gaze shifted toward the ground, as if imagining the artifact hidden far below. It holds knowledge vital to our survival. Daniel frowned, trying to process what he was hearing. So you're saying you came all this way just to find some old thing underground? He couldn't help but feel skeptical. Why didn't you just ask for help instead of sneaking around like this? Zale's expression didn't change. It was hard to tell if aliens even had expressions, but its telepathic voice carried a hint of sadness. Humans often react with fear when faced with the unknown. We chose discretion to avoid conflict. Before they could ask more questions, a loud rustling came from the trees behind them. Daniel spun around, shining his flashlight into the darkness. Two more figures emerged, humans, dressed in dark clothes and carrying flashlights of their own. One of them called out, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" It was Agent Robert Hayes and another man in a suit, both looking stern and suspicious. Hayes stepped forward, his sharp eyes narrowing as he noticed Zale standing beside Daniel and Grace. "Step away from that thing," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Daniel instinctively moved closer to Zale, while Grace raised her hands defensively. "Wait," she said quickly. "It's not dangerous. It's just trying to fix its ship." Hayes ignored her, focusing on Zale. "Do not move," he commanded, pulling out a small device that looked like a scanner. "We need to assess the situation." His partner fumbled with a radio, muttering something about backup. Zale remained still, though its posture stiffened slightly. Inside Daniel and Grace's minds, it whispered urgently, "They cannot discover our purpose here. Trust must be earned, not forced." Grace glanced at Daniel, panic flickering in her eyes. They both knew Hayes wouldn't listen to reason, not yet, anyway. But they also knew they couldn't let him take Zale away. Whatever this alien's mission was, it clearly mattered. A lot. As Hayes approached Zale, Daniel made a quick decision. "Let's go," he muttered under his breath to Grace. "We'll figure this out later." Without waiting for a response, he grabbed Grace's arm and bolted into the woods, hoping to lead Hayes away from the clearing and give Zale a chance to escape. For now, they were caught between two worlds, the familiar one they knew and the mysterious one Zale represented. And neither of them realized how much their lives were about to change. Daniel and Grace ran through the forest, their feet crunching against the leaves and twigs scattered on the ground. Behind them, they could hear Agent Hayes shouting orders to his partner, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they gave chase. Daniel's heart was pounding in his chest, but he didn't dare slow down. He glanced back at Grace, who was struggling to keep up. "Are you okay?" he asked between breaths. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice was tight with effort. "Just don't stop." They zigzagged between trees, trying to lose Hayes and his partner. After several minutes of running, they finally ducked behind a cluster of bushes near a rocky slope. The agents' voices grew fainter as they moved farther away, still searching for them. Daniel peeked out cautiously, making sure the coast was clear. "I think we lost them," he whispered. Grace leaned against a tree, catching her breath. Her mind was racing. "Do you think Zale got away?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with worry. "I hope so," Daniel replied. "If Hayes finds it, or whatever that ship is, he'll try to take it apart. You saw how he acted back there." Grace nodded. She knew Daniel was right. Hayes didn't seem interested in understanding Zale or its mission. To him, the alien was just a threat, or an opportunity to gain something valuable. "We have to help," Grace said firmly. "Zale trusted us enough to talk. We can't just leave it." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "All right, but we need a plan. If we go back now, Hayes will arrest us, or worse." Grace thought for a moment, then her eyes lit up. "What if we fix the ship ourselves?" Zale said it was damaged. "If we can get it working again, maybe it can leave before Hayes figures out what's going on." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You really think we can fix an alien spaceship?" "We've got tools," Grace said, determination in her voice. "And we're smart. Besides, Zale might be able to guide us. It seemed willing to cooperate earlier." Daniel couldn't argue with that. They had no other choice. "Okay," he said. "Let's head back. But we need to be careful." When they returned to the clearing, Zale was still there, standing silently near the ship. Its glowing skin shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and its large eyes turned toward them as they approached. "You came back," it said telepathically, its tone calm but curious. "We want to help," Grace said quickly. "Can you show us what's wrong with your ship?" Zale hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." It led them to the side of the craft, where a panel had been removed, revealing a tangle of wires and strange, pulsating components. Sparks occasionally flew from one section, accompanied by a low hum. "This unit regulates energy flow," Zale explained. "It requires repair." Daniel knelt down, examining the exposed machinery. He wasn't an expert, but he'd worked on enough engines to recognize patterns. "Grace, hand me my toolbox," he said. She quickly passed it over, and he began inspecting the wires. "Zale, can you tell me which part is broken?" Zale pointed, with a long, slender finger, to a small, glowing cube embedded in the system. "This component is malfunctioning. Replacing it should restore functionality." "Replacing it," Daniel muttered, scratching his head. "With what? I don't exactly carry spare alien parts in my toolbox." Grace stepped forward, holding up her phone. "Maybe this can help." She opened a note-taking app and asked Zale to describe the component's properties. As Zale explained, she jotted down details like size, shape, and energy output. "If we can find something similar, something human-made, it might work as a temporary fix." Daniel nodded, impressed by Grace's quick thinking. "Good idea. Let's see what we've got." For the next hour, they worked together, using pieces from Daniel's toolbox and scraps they found nearby. Zale guided them patiently, offering advice when needed. Slowly but surely, they began to make progress. The sparks stopped flying, and the hum grew steadier. As they worked, Grace couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. Here she was, fixing an alien spaceship in the middle of the woods. It felt surreal, like something out of one of her favorite sci-fi novels. But this was real, and somehow she knew their actions tonight would change everything. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the trees. Hayes and his partner were back. "Over here," Hayes shouted, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. "We're out of time," Daniel said urgently, tightening the last connection. "Does it work?" Zale reached out and touched the ship. A soft glow spread across its surface, and the hum grew louder. "It is functional," Zale confirmed. "Thank you." Hayes burst into the clearing, his face hard with suspicion. "Step away from the craft," he ordered, raising a strange device in his hand. Grace stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "Please, don't do this. Zale isn't our enemy." Hayes ignored her, his focus locked on the alien. "This isn't over," he said coldly. But Zale was already moving toward the ship, its form shimmering as if preparing to leave. Before Hayes could act, the craft's door slid open, and Zale stepped inside. The ship began to rise silently into the air, leaving Hayes and his partner staring in stunned silence. As the ship disappeared into the night sky, Daniel and Grace stood side by side, watching it go. They didn't know what would happen next, but they knew their lives would never be the same. The next morning, Pine Ridge was buzzing with rumors. News of the alien ship and its mysterious disappearance had spread quickly, fueled by Hayes and his team questioning everyone who lived near the forest. Daniel and Grace tried to act normal as they went about their day, but it wasn't easy. Both knew they couldn't talk about what really happened, not yet. Hayes hadn't given up. He set up a temporary command post in the town's community center, turning it into a makeshift investigation hub. Maps, photos, and notes covered the walls, and agents moved in and out, gathering information. Hayes himself seemed restless, pacing back and forth as he reviewed reports. He kept replaying the events of the previous night in his mind. The glowing ship, the strange being called Zeal, and the two locals who had helped it escape. Something about Daniel and Grace didn't sit right with him. Later that afternoon, Hayes paid them a visit. He showed up at Daniel's garage first, where Daniel was working on a car engine. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Hayes asked, his tone polite but firm. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "Sure. What do you want to know?" Hayes pulled out a small notepad. "You were seen near the crash site last night. Can you tell me what you saw?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Not much. Just some lights and noises. Me and Grace got scared and left." Hayes studied him closely, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of dishonesty. "And you didn't see anything unusual?" "No one, or nothing, out of the ordinary." "Nope," Daniel replied, keeping his voice steady. "Just trees and shadows." Hayes frowned but didn't push further. "All right, thanks for your time." He turned to leave but paused at the door. "If you remember anything else, let me know." After Hayes left, Daniel exhaled deeply. That was too close. He grabbed his phone and called Grace. "He just came by," he said when she answered. "Asked about last night." "What did you say?" Grace asked, her voice tense. "The same story we agreed on. Lights, noises, nothing more." Daniel leaned against the workbench. "But he's onto us. We need to be careful." Grace sighed. "I know. He stopped by my place earlier too. Same questions. I think he suspects something." That evening, they met at Grace's house to figure out their next move. Sitting at her kitchen table, they pored over the notes she had taken about Zale's ship and the damaged component. "We still don't know why Zale needed that artifact," Grace said, tapping her pen against the paper. "What if it comes back for it? And what if Hayes finds it first?" Daniel added grimly. "He's not going to stop digging until he gets answers." Grace nodded. "We should try to find it ourselves. If we can get to it before Hayes, maybe we can protect it, or at least understand what it does." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about hunting for an alien relic buried underground. Do you even know where to start?" Grace pointed to a map she had sketched based on Zale's vague description. It said the artifact is somewhere beneath the forest, maybe near the crash site. If we search there, we might find clues. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. They decided to go back to the clearing after dark, hoping to avoid drawing attention. Armed with flashlights, shovels, and Grace's notes, they made their way through the woods. When they arrived, the area looked eerily quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The spot where the ship had been was empty, leaving only flattened grass behind. Grace knelt down, examining the ground. "Zale mentioned something about energy readings," she murmured. "Maybe we can follow those." Daniel shook his head. "We don't have fancy alien scanners, Grace. How are we supposed to track energy readings?" Grace smiled faintly. "We improvise." She handed him a handheld metal detector she'd borrowed from a neighbor, explaining that it might pick up unusual signals. As they swept the device over the area, It began to beep faintly. Following the sound, they moved deeper into the woods, eventually stopping near a patch of disturbed earth. "This has to be it," Grace whispered, excitement mixing with nervousness. She started digging, and Daniel joined in. After several minutes of effort, their shovels hit something solid, a large, smooth surface buried just below the soil. Carefully, they brushed away the dirt to reveal a crystalline structure glowing faintly with an inner light. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen, pulsating rhythmically like a heartbeat. Grace stared at it in awe. "This is it," she breathed. The artifact Zale was looking for. Before they could examine it further, a voice cut through the silence. "Step away from that." It was Hayes, standing a few feet away with his partner. In his hand was a strange device, aimed directly at the artifact. Grace stepped forward instinctively. "You don't understand. This isn't safe to tamper with." Hayes ignored her, his focus fixed on the crystal. "Stand back," he ordered. "This changes everything." As Hayes activated the device, the artifact began to glow brighter, emitting a low hum that grew louder by the second. Daniel and Grace exchanged worried glances. Whatever Hayes was doing, it wasn't going to end well. The hum from the artifact grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. The air around it shimmered, and the glow intensified until it was almost blinding. Grace shielded her eyes with one hand while reaching out toward Hayes with the other. "Please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you're doing." Hayes didn't listen. His focus was entirely on the device in his hand, which he adjusted with small, precise movements. The artifact reacted violently to whatever signal the device was emitting, pulsing erratically now. Sparks of light shot out in all directions, forcing everyone to step back. Daniel grabbed Grace's arm, pulling her away from the chaos. "We need to stop him," he said urgently. "If this thing blows up or does something worse, we're all in danger." Grace nodded, her mind racing. She glanced at Hayes' partner, who looked just as uneasy as they did. Maybe there was a way to reason with them, or at least distract them long enough to shut off the device. "Agent Hayes," Grace shouted over the noise. "Think about this. Zale told us humans weren't its target. This isn't ours to control." Hayes turned sharply, his face hard with determination. "That's exactly why we need to understand it," he snapped. "If aliens like Zale are willing to risk everything for this thing, imagine what it could mean for us, for humanity." "But at what cost?" Grace argued, stepping closer despite the growing intensity of the artifact's energy. "You saw how advanced their technology is. Do you really think we're ready for something like this? What if you make it unstable?" Hayes hesitated for a split second, but it wasn't enough. The artifact let out a deafening crackle, sending out a wave of energy that knocked everyone off their feet. Daniel hit the ground hard, his ears ringing from the shock. When he opened his eyes, he saw Hayes scrambling to regain control of his device, but the artifact had taken on a life of its own. It floated slightly above the ground now, spinning slowly as beams of light shot into the sky. Grace crawled toward Hayes, desperation in her voice. "Turn it off. You're making it worse." "I can't," Hayes yelled back, panic finally breaking through his stern demeanor. "The controls aren't responding." The forest around them seemed alive with the artifact's power. Trees swayed unnaturally, leaves swirling in chaotic patterns. The ground trembled, and cracks began forming in the earth. Daniel realized they were running out of time. If the artifact kept building energy, it might destroy the entire area, or worse. "We have to get rid of that device," Daniel shouted, pointing at the gadget in Hayes' hand. Without waiting for a response, he lunged forward, tackling Hayes to the ground. The two men wrestled briefly before Daniel managed to grab the device. He threw it as far as he could, watching it shatter against a tree trunk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the artifact dimmed slightly, its spin slowing down. But it wasn't stopping completely. Something else was keeping it active, something beyond their control. Grace stood up, brushing dirt off her jeans. Her eyes locked onto the artifact, and she took a deep breath. Zale said this relic holds knowledge, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. Maybe it needs someone to guide it. What are you talking about? Daniel asked, standing beside her. Grace didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer to the artifact, ignoring Daniel's protests. As she reached out, her fingers brushed its surface. A surge of warmth spread through her body, and images flooded her mind. Strange symbols, distant planets, and voices speaking in languages she couldn't understand. It was overwhelming, but she didn't pull away. The artifact responded to her touch, its glow softening further. Slowly, it descended back to the ground, settling gently into the soil. The hum faded, and the forest fell silent once more. Hayes stared at Grace, his expression unreadable. What did you do? Grace shook her head, still catching her breath. I don't know. I just trusted it. Daniel walked over, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Whatever it is, it's done for now. As they stood there, surrounded by the quiet woods, Hayes looked down at the artifact, his earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. For the first time, he seemed unsure of what to do next. And in that moment, Grace and Daniel knew they had bought themselves, and the world, a little more time. The silence in the forest was heavy, broken only by the sound of leaves rustling in the cool night breeze. Grace stood frozen, her hand still hovering near the artifact, as if afraid to move. Daniel kept his arm around her shoulders, partly to steady her and partly to shield her from Hayes, who was watching them with a mix of suspicion and awe. Hayes finally spoke, his voice quieter than before, but still sharp. You two need to explain what just happened. He gestured toward the artifact, now resting peacefully in the ground like an ordinary rock. That thing nearly tore this place apart. Grace swallowed hard, trying to gather her thoughts. I don't know exactly, she admitted. It felt like it wanted me to touch it, like it was waiting for someone to connect with it. Daniel nodded, backing her up. It stopped when Grace touched it. Maybe it needed some kind of input or trust to settle down. Hayes frowned, clearly skeptical. Trust? From an alien relic? You expect me to believe that? It doesn't matter what you believe, Daniel shot back, his frustration boiling over. What matters is that we stopped it from blowing up, or whatever it was about to do. Isn't that enough? Hayes didn't respond right away. Instead, he knelt beside the artifact, studying it closely. His partner hovered nearby, looking uneasy. After a moment, Hayes stood up and turned to face them. This changes nothing. Whatever this thing is, it's too dangerous to leave here. We're taking it with us. No. Grace stepped forward, her voice firm despite the fear bubbling inside her. You can't take it. You saw what happened when you tried to control it. It's not meant to be used. Not by us, anyway. And how would you know? Hayes challenged, his tone icy. You think you understand this thing after one touch. This could be humanity's greatest discovery. Do you really want to risk losing that? It's not ours to take, Grace argued, her hands clenched into fists. Zale said it holds knowledge, but knowledge isn't always safe. If we mess with something we don't understand, we could hurt ourselves, or worse. Hayes stared at her, his jaw tight. For a moment, it seemed like he might ignore her warning and order his partner to retrieve the artifact anyway. But then he glanced at the ground, his expression softening slightly. Fine, he said reluctantly. We'll leave it, for now. But I'm posting guards here until we figure out our next move. Grace let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her. She knew Hayes wasn't giving up completely, but at least they'd bought some time. As long as the artifact stayed buried where it belonged, there was hope. Back in town, word of the mysterious events spread even faster. People whispered about aliens, glowing objects, and strange lights in the sky. Some were scared, others were excited. By morning, a small crowd had gathered near the edge of the woods, curious to see the sight for themselves. Hayes' agents kept them at bay, but rumors flew wild. Grace and Daniel avoided the attention as best they could. They met at Daniel's garage, sitting on crates while sipping coffee. Neither of them had slept much, their minds replaying the night's events over and over. "What are we going to do now?" Grace asked quietly, staring into her cup. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. Hayes won't stop pushing. He'll find a way to get what he wants eventually. We have to warn people," Grace said firmly. "If Hayes tries to take the artifact again, it could go wrong. Really wrong. Someone needs to stand up and tell everyone the truth." Daniel looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "You're braver than I am," he said with a small smile. "But you're right. Keeping quiet isn't helping anyone." They decided to talk to the townsfolk, starting with those closest to them. Over the next few days, they shared their story with friends, neighbors, and even some local leaders. At first, many were skeptical, dismissing their claims as wild speculation. But others listened, especially after hearing about Hayes' secretive behavior and the growing military presence near the forest. Slowly, support began to build. A group of residents formed a makeshift watch team, keeping an eye on the area to ensure no one tampered with the artifact without proper oversight. Even some of Hayes' own agents started questioning his motives, whispering among themselves about whether he was doing the right thing. One evening, Grace addressed a small gathering at the community center. Standing in front of a room filled with worried faces, she spoke calmly but passionately. "We don't fully understand what's out there," she said, gesturing toward the forest. "But one thing is clear. Fear and greed will only make things worse. If we act responsibly, if we work together, we might actually learn something valuable." Her words resonated with many, sparking conversations that continued late into the night. For the first time since the alien ship appeared, Pine Ridge felt united, not against outsiders, but in pursuit of understanding. As Grace stepped down from the podium, Daniel gave her a proud smile. "You did good," he said softly. Grace smiled back, though her eyes were weary. "Let's just hope it's enough." The days that followed were tense, but filled with a strange sense of purpose. Pine Ridge had never felt so alive, its residents coming together in ways they hadn't before. Grace and Daniel became unofficial leaders of the movement to protect the artifact, organizing meetings, answering questions, and rallying people to stay vigilant. The townsfolk worked tirelessly, setting up patrols around the forest and keeping an eye on Hayes' agents, who still lingered nearby. Hayes, however, wasn't idle. He continued to push his agenda, determined to gain control over the situation. Every day, he sent reports to his superiors, requesting more resources and personnel. His frustration grew as he realized the community was starting to resist him. Even some of his own team began questioning his methods, especially after hearing Grace's speech about cooperation and responsibility. One evening, Hayes called a meeting at the community center. The room was packed with locals, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and defiance. Hayes stood at the front, flanked by two agents, his posture rigid and authoritative. "I understand your concerns," he began, his voice steady but firm. "But we cannot ignore the potential this artifact holds for humanity. It could change everything: medicine, technology, energy sources. We owe it to ourselves to explore it." A man in the crowd stood up, his arms crossed. "And what if it destroys us instead? You saw what happened last time you tried to mess with it." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Hayes raised a hand, trying to calm them. "That was a mistake, a miscalculation. But we've learned from it. With proper precautions, we can handle this safely." Grace stepped forward, her expression calm but resolute. "Agent Hayes, no matter how careful you think you're being, there's too much we don't know. This isn't just about us. It's about respecting something bigger than ourselves. Zale trusted us to leave the artifact alone. Shouldn't we honor that?" Hayes' jaw tightened. "Zale isn't human. Its priorities aren't ours. We have a duty to protect our future." But at what cost? Another voice chimed in. It was Mrs. Harper, an elderly woman who ran the local bakery. She stood slowly, leaning on her cane. We've seen enough wars and disasters to know what happens when greed gets in the way of reason. Maybe it's time we listened to each other and to those who came here peacefully. Her words struck a chord, earning nods and murmurs of approval from the crowd. Hayes looked around the room, realizing he was losing ground. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He glanced at his agents, then back at the townspeople. "This isn't over," he said finally, his tone softer but still defiant. "But I'll consider your concerns." Later that night, Grace and Daniel sat on the porch of Grace's house, watching the stars twinkle above the trees. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine. They were exhausted but hopeful, feeling like they'd made progress, even if it was small. "You think Hayes will actually listen?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. Grace shrugged. "Maybe not completely. But I think he heard us. That's a start." They sat quietly for a while, listening to the crickets chirp. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder why Zale chose us? Out of everyone, why did it talk to us?" Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe because we were willing to listen. Not everyone would have stayed in that clearing, you know. Most people would have run, or called the authorities right away." Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, well, we're not exactly heroes. Just curious, I guess." "Curiosity isn't a bad thing," Grace replied. "It's what makes us human." As they sat there, a soft glow appeared in the sky. At first, they thought it was just the moon breaking through the clouds. But then the light grew brighter, taking shape, a familiar round craft descending silently toward the forest. "They're back," Daniel whispered, standing up quickly. Grace followed him as they hurried toward the clearing. When they arrived, the ship had already landed, its surface shimmering softly under the moonlight. Zale emerged, accompanied by 2 other aliens. Their movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. "We have come to retrieve the artifact," Zale said telepathically, its voice calm but urgent. "Its energy is destabilizing. If left unchecked, it may harm your planet." Grace exchanged a glance with Daniel. "Can you take it without causing any damage?" "Yes," Zale replied. "But we require your assistance. Trust must be mutual." Without hesitation, Grace nodded. "Tell us what to do." Together, they guided Zale and its crew to the artifact. Using tools and devices brought from the ship, the aliens carefully extracted the relic, enveloping it in a protective field. As they worked, Hayes and his agents arrived, watching from a distance. For once, Hayes didn't interfere. He simply observed, his expression unreadable. When the artifact was safely aboard the ship, Zale turned to Grace and Daniel. "Your actions have shown wisdom and courage. Perhaps one day your kind will join us among the stars." Before they could respond, the ship rose into the sky, disappearing in seconds. The forest fell silent once more, leaving only memories behind. As Grace and Daniel walked back to town, hand in hand, they knew life would never be the same. But for the first time, they felt ready for whatever came next. The days after Zale's departure felt surreal. Pine Ridge was quiet again, the hum of the artifact gone, and the forest peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But for Grace and Daniel, and many others, the experience lingered in their minds like a vivid dream that refused to fade. The town had changed, not just because of the aliens or the mysterious relic, but because its people had come together in ways they never expected. Hayes and his team packed up their equipment within a week, leaving behind only faint traces of their presence. Before he left, Hayes approached Grace and Daniel one last time. His usual stern demeanor had softened, replaced by something closer to respect. "You were right," he admitted, his voice low. "We weren't ready for something like that. Maybe we still aren't." Grace nodded, offering him a small smile. "It's okay to admit when you don't have all the answers." That's how we learn." Hayes didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out toward the forest, where the clearing now stood empty. "I'll make sure this stays off the record. For now. But someday, humanity will need to face these kinds of questions again. When that day comes, I hope we're better prepared." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into his car without another word. It was a small victory, but Grace and Daniel knew it mattered. For once, someone in power had listened, even if reluctantly. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible. Grace went back to teaching, though her students noticed she seemed different somehow. She smiled more often and encouraged them to ask questions about science and the universe. "Curiosity is the key to understanding," she told them during one lesson. "Never stop asking why." Daniel spent most of his time in his garage, tinkering with machines and working on projects inspired by what he'd seen. He even started sketching designs for tools based on Zale's technology, though he knew building anything like it was far beyond his reach. Still, dreaming gave him hope. The townsfolk continued to talk about what had happened, sharing stories over coffee or at family dinners. Some joked about aliens visiting Pine Ridge, while others spoke seriously about the lessons they'd learned. Slowly, the fear that had gripped the community dissolved, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. One evening, Grace and Daniel climbed a hill overlooking the forest, sitting side by side as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky blazed with colors, orange, pink, and purple, before fading into a deep blue dotted with stars. They sat in comfortable silence, letting the cool breeze wash over them. "You think Zale made it back safely?" Daniel asked after a while. Grace nodded. "I do. And I think they'll remember us too." "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" Grace tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe. Or maybe other visitors will come someday. Either way, I think we're ready now. We know we can choose trust over fear." Daniel smiled, reaching out to take her hand. "That's thanks to you. You kept us grounded through all of it." Grace shook her head, smiling back. "No, it was both of us. And everyone else who stood up and said no to fear." As the first stars appeared in the night sky, they sat there, watching and wondering. Somewhere out there, among the vastness of space, Zale and its crew were traveling onward, carrying the artifact to wherever it belonged. Pine Ridge might seem small compared to the infinite expanse of the universe, but for Grace and Daniel, it felt bigger than ever. They didn't have all the answers, and maybe they never would, but they understood one thing clearly: humanity wasn't alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, that wasn't such a bad thing. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying whispers of possibility. As Grace and Daniel stood up to head home, they felt a renewed sense of hope, not just for themselves, but for everyone. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew humanity could rise to meet them, together.